Welcome to True Love Story with deep love where every heartbeat hides a story. Here, love isn't perfect. It's real. It begins in stolen glances, grows through silence, and sometimes breaks under the weight of its own truth. These are stories of love that crossed boundaries, of guilt that became devotion, of tenderness that turned into sin, and the price that every heart must pay when it dares to love beyond reason. Each story you hear isn't just fiction. It's a confession, a memory, a whisper from the soul. If you've ever loved too deeply, lost too quietly, or felt something you couldn't explain, this place is for you, because here, love isn't about forever, it's about feeling forever, even when it ends. Welcome home to the stories your heart has been waiting to remember. It started quietly, without intention, without plan, the way the sun rises without asking permission from the night. He used to come home tired, his voice gentle, his smile weary but kind. There was nothing strange about him at first, just the way he spoke, the way he carried silence between his words, the way he looked at her mother with patience, a patience that felt safe. He belonged to another world, one built long before her own heart learned to want. But sometimes admiration grows in shadows, quietly feeding on moments too small to notice. It began when he asked for help finding a book in the old study. Their hands brushed only for a second, but it was enough to wake something that had been sleeping for too long. He looked up, perhaps to apologize, but his eyes stayed a little too long, as if something familiar had appeared in them. The days that followed were filled with silence that said more than words ever could. When he entered the room, the air shifted. The sound of his footsteps became a language, a rhythm the heart could recognize even among 1,000 others. Every small act of kindness felt heavier than it should. A question hung between them, one neither dared to ask but both already knew the answer to. He never spoke of love, he never touched again, yet something invisible lingered like a pulse between two souls unwilling to let go. Sometimes when he smiled, it felt like sunlight breaking through a window that should have stayed closed. Sometimes, when his gaze met hers, the world stopped pretending that what they felt was wrong. The guilt was constant, sharp, tender, unrelenting. Every heartbeat carried both longing and shame. How could something that felt so deeply right also feel like betrayal? The mirror became an enemy, reflecting a face that no longer knew where the line between love and sin was drawn. Each night, sleep came with memories that had never happened, imagined touches, whispered promises that belonged only to silence. He tried to stay away. He spoke less, avoided her eyes. But even distance has its own cruel intimacy, the ache of absence, the quiet wish for one more accidental moment. There were nights when the house fell asleep and the air turned heavy with thoughts unspoken. Sometimes he would sit in the garden alone, and from the upstairs window, the light of his cigarette looked like a heartbeat in the dark. She would tell herself not to care, that he was not hers to feel for, that the warmth she saw in him belonged to someone else, to a woman who had trusted him, loved him, shared her life with him. But feelings are stubborn things. They do not ask for permission. They do not seek approval. They simply exist, and once they do, no amount of reasoning can erase them. Then came the night of rain. The power went out, and the house felt smaller, quieter. He was in the kitchen, lighting candles. The flicker of light painted his face in soft gold. He looked up, saw her standing there hesitant, guilty, lost. For a long moment neither moved, only the rain spoke, tapping against the windows like a confession. When he reached out to hand her a candle, their fingers met again. No words were exchanged, but in that fragile moment, something broke, or perhaps something finally became whole. The world beyond that kitchen vanished. There was only warmth, trembling, and the terrifying beauty of feeling seen for the first time. It lasted just a second, but that second carried eternity within it. After that night, everything changed, not in what was done, but in what could never again be undone. He became quieter, she became colder. The air between them carried the weight of unspoken truth. When he laughed with her mother, it hurt. When he avoided her eyes, it hurt even more. Love, when forbidden, becomes both a blessing and a punishment. It teaches how deeply a heart can feel and how silently it can break. Time moved on as it always does. He grew older, the lines on his face deeper. She left that house, taking with her the ghost of a feeling that would never die. And though the world went on pretending nothing had happened, she knew some loves never leave. They simply change their form. They live in glances, in songs that ache, in dreams that linger long after morning comes. Now, years later, his memory returns not as regret, but as a quiet truth. There was love real, flawed, forbidden, yet love all the same. It taught that hearts are not always noble, that desire does not always wear purity, and that even the wrong kind of love can leave behind something achingly beautiful. Because sometimes the most painful stories are the ones that prove how human we are. And though it could never be spoken aloud, it will always remain the tenderness that should never have been, yet somehow always was. It began without meaning to. Some feelings don't ask for permission. They arrive quietly, finding a home in the most impossible places. He wasn't supposed to matter that much. At first, he was just someone kind, steady, with a warmth that made the air softer. There was no reason to feel drawn to him, yet something in his presence felt safe, familiar, like a place long lost but somehow remembered. He had a way of speaking that made the world around him slow down. Every word seemed to carry care, as if he was afraid to hurt even with silence. It started with small moments, shared laughter over simple things, conversations that lingered long after they should have ended. The connection felt innocent, but somewhere between the glances and the pauses, the line began to blur. It wasn't love at first. It was comfort, gentle, unspoken, healing. But comfort has a way of turning into dependence when the heart begins to crave what it shouldn't. There were evenings when the house felt too quiet, and the memory of his voice filled that emptiness. There were mornings when just the thought of seeing him brought warmth that shouldn't have existed. He would look at her sometimes in that searching way that makes words unnecessary. There was understanding in his eyes, a recognition that went deeper than it should have. Neither of them said anything. It was safer that way, yet silence can be louder than confession. It carries everything unsaid, every emotion tucked away behind polite restraint. The guilt began slowly, like a whisper at first, then a shadow that followed everywhere. Every smile came with a sting. Every moment of closeness carried the weight of something forbidden. There were times when it felt unbearable, wanting what could never be yours, needing to pretend that what existed between two hearts was nothing at all. And yet the heart refused to listen. Logic couldn't undo the way it quickened at the sound of his voice, or the way his kindness felt like sunlight through a storm. Sometimes love isn't loud, it's quiet, trembling, afraid of its own truth. It hides behind small gestures, a hand offered, a question asked with care, a glance that lingers too long. There was a night when everything almost broke. The air was thick with rain, and he stood close enough to feel his breath. He said something ordinary, something harmless, but the way he said it made everything else disappear. For one suspended moment, the world shrank to just that space between them, filled with warmth and danger and longing too deep to name. Nothing happened, and yet everything did. The silence after that was full of meaning they couldn't afford to speak. Days passed, but something had changed. Every time they met, the heart remembered. Every time he smiled, it hurt. There were nights when sleep wouldn't come, when thoughts spun endlessly of what was right, what was real, what was already lost. She told herself it would fade, that feelings this wrong couldn't last. But love, once it takes root, doesn't listen to reason. It grows where it's not supposed to, feeding on every memory, every ache. He must have known. He began to keep his distance, to speak less, to stay away longer. But even distance couldn't erase what had already taken form inside the heart. If anything, it made it stronger. The longing fed on absence. The guilt deepened with every day of pretending it wasn't there. There were times she wished she could hate him. It would have been easier to carry anger than this endless ache. But love doesn't turn to hate just because it should. It lingers in the smallest things, the echo of his laughter, the kindness in his eyes, the way he once said her name as if it meant something fragile. Eventually he left. It wasn't a sudden goodbye, just a slow fading, the kind that leaves no closure, only silence. Life went on, as it always does, but something within her stayed behind, caught in the echo of what had been. Guilt remained, a reminder of the boundary crossed in thought, if not in action, of the heart that chose warmth even when it knew it shouldn't. Years later, the memory still carries weight, not as pain anymore, but as understanding. Some loves are not meant to be lived, they are meant to be learned from. They teach how fragile the heart is, how easily it confuses need for destiny, how deeply it can feel even when it shouldn't. That warmth, that forbidden tenderness, never truly faded. It exists somewhere between memory and regret, a quiet echo that time cannot silence, because the truth is simple. The heart doesn't always obey what's right. Sometimes it follows the warmth that feels like home, even when that home was never meant to be its own. And some loves, no matter how wrong, never stop feeling real. There are loves that live in the light, and there are loves that survive only in shadows. This one belonged to the second kind, the kind that hides behind silence, that breathes quietly, afraid of being seen. It began in innocence, as most forbidden things do. A simple conversation, a passing smile, a shared moment that lingered longer than it should have. There was no plan, no desire for sin, only warmth, unexpected and real, in a place where it should never have been found. He had a calm presence, the kind that made the world slow down. His words were never many, but they carried weight. There was gentleness in him, a kind of quiet strength that drew people close. And yet, it was that same gentleness that became dangerous, because when someone listens without judgment, when they see you without pretending, the heart begins to open even when it knows it shouldn't. There were long evenings filled with small conversations that felt too big to be casual, laughter that came easily, pauses that felt like confessions. Sometimes when their eyes met, something deeper passed between them, something unspoken but undeniable. It wasn't love, not at first. It was recognition of loneliness, of need, of two souls standing too close to the edge. She tried to convince herself it was harmless, that what she felt was admiration, gratitude, a simple connection. But love doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it grows quietly, patiently, between words and moments that seem ordinary. And by the time it's named, it's already too late. The guilt came hand in hand with the longing. Every tender thought was shadowed by shame, every heartbeat by denial. She told herself that what she felt was wrong, that the line must never be crossed. But lines, when drawn by the heart, are fragile things. They blur under the weight of emotion, dissolve in the warmth of understanding. There was a night when everything nearly broke. The air was heavy with rain, the house wrapped in silence. He was sitting by the window, lost in thought, and she stood near the doorway, unable to look away. When he finally turned toward her, the world seemed to stop. There was no touch, no word spoken, only a look that said everything neither dared to admit. In that look lived the truth of their souls, the confession that their lips would never form. It wasn't lust, and it wasn't possession. It was something deeper, the ache of finding love in the wrong place, at the wrong time, with the wrong person. That night, when they parted without a word, it felt like a piece of her stayed behind, caught between right and wrong, love and sin. Days turned into weeks, and the distance between them grew, but so did the silence that held them together. Every stolen glance carried the weight of the unspoken. Every conversation felt like walking a tightrope, one wrong word, and everything would fall apart. She learned how to smile when she wanted to cry, how to look away when every part of her wanted to stay. And yet, despite every attempt to bury it, the love refused to die. It lived in the quiet hours, when sleep wouldn't come and memories came alive. It whispered in the dark, asking questions the mind refused to answer. How can something so wrong feel so right? How can a heart be guilty for what it cannot control? He must have felt it too, the same pull, the same torment. There were moments when he avoided her completely, and others when he seemed unable to. The tension between them became its own language, full of restraint, full of pain. They never crossed the line, but they lived on its edge, breathing the same air, longing for what could never be. Then came the day he left. No dramatic goodbye, no tears, only a quiet end, the kind that leaves a silence so deep it echoes. After that, everything felt hollow, the rooms, the days, even the air. It was as if the world had lost its color. But time, cruel and kind, kept moving, and so did she. Years passed and the guilt softened, but the memory remained, not as regret, but as a truth, one that couldn't be erased or rewritten. There was love, undeniable and real, born in a place it should never have existed. It taught that love is not always pure, not always noble. Sometimes it's just human, flawed, fragile, full of contradiction. Now, in the quiet moments of remembering, there's no shame left, only acceptance. The soul has long since confessed what the mouth never could, that even in sin, there was sincerity, even in wrongness, there was something true, because the line between love and sin isn't always clear. Sometimes it's drawn in sand, and sometimes the tide takes it away, and though it could never be spoken, it remains the love that was never meant to be, yet too real to deny. Some loves come softly, like a breeze you don't notice until it's already changed the air around you. Others arrive like fire, beautiful, consuming, impossible to control. This one began quietly and ended in silence, but everything in between was a storm. It wasn't supposed to happen. It shouldn't have happened. But sometimes the heart doesn't care about rules or right or reason. It only knows what it feels, and once it feels deeply, there's no undoing it. He came into life at a time when everything felt unfinished. The world was gray, the days repetitive, and the nights too quiet. His presence changed that. He brought light without trying to. He wasn't extraordinary in any way, but he carried a calm that drew everything toward him. His voice had warmth, his eyes carried patience, and his kindness. It was the kind that made you forget how to guard your heart. At first, it was easy to stay distant. There was nothing dangerous about small talk, laughter, shared moments that seemed harmless. But love rarely begins with danger. It starts with comfort, and comfort is the most dangerous thing of all. He listened in ways no one else did, with attention that felt like safety. Every word seemed to land somewhere it belonged. And soon, every conversation started feeling like a place she didn't want to leave. It wasn't about wanting him. It was about feeling seen, understood, noticed in ways that had long been forgotten. But understanding turned to attachment, and attachment became something stronger, a quiet, growing ache that refused to go away. She knew the feeling was wrong, knew where it would lead, but knowing is not the same as stopping. There were moments she tried to pull away, to build distance, to pretend the heart hadn't already crossed a line. But love, once born, refuses to be buried. It found its way into everything, the way she waited for his messages, the way her breath changed when his name appeared, the way his absence hurt more than it should. Each time she tried to turn away, something deeper pulled her back. And he wasn't innocent either. There were looks that lingered too long, silences that spoke louder than words. There was the night he said her name differently, softly, like it meant something only they understood. In that single moment, the world felt both right and completely wrong. What they shared was fragile, fleeting, yet it carried a weight that neither of them could bear. They told themselves it was love. Maybe it was, but love without boundaries doesn't stay gentle. It starts to demand, to consume, to hurt. The secrecy, the fear, the constant battle between right and wrong, it became too much. She began to see it not just as love, but as a slow undoing. A happiness that asked for too much of the soul. The guilt came every morning. It lived in the mirror, in the eyes that couldn't lie. Every beautiful moment carried its own punishment. Every joy had a shadow. There was no peace, only the constant reminder that something pure had been twisted by circumstance. Yet even through the pain, she couldn't stop caring, because love doesn't vanish when you learn it's wrong. It stays soft and stubborn, reminding you of what could have been if only the world had been kinder. When it ended, it wasn't with anger. There were no harsh words, no scenes, no promises, just silence, the kind that feels heavier than sound. He walked away first, and she let him. Maybe because she knew he had to, or maybe because she no longer had the strength to hold on. The emptiness he left behind was unbearable, but in some cruel way it felt deserved. Time passed. The world kept moving even when she didn't want it to. Faces changed, places changed, but some things stayed: the memory of his voice, the way he smiled, the warmth that still lived like a ghost beneath her skin. Love faded, but its mark didn't. It lingered quietly like a scar, one that no one else could see, but that never stopped aching. Sometimes late at night the memory still returns, not as longing but as a reminder. A reminder of how much was lost for something that was never meant to last. The price of loving wrong isn't always pain, sometimes it's emptiness, the kind that follows you quietly, whispering what could have been if only you had chosen differently. Now, with time between them and truth long accepted, there's no anger left, only understanding that not all love is meant to be right, that some feelings are born just to break you open, to teach you the difference between desire and destiny. He was both the ache and the lesson, the sin and the truth. And though life moved on, something of him will always remain, not in the heart's desire anymore, but in its silence, the part that remembers how beautiful it once was to feel something so real, even when it was wrong. Because some choices never fade, they stay written on the soul, quiet but unerasable. And love, even when it's wrong, always leaves a mark. Thank you for listening to True Love Story with Deep Love. If this story touched something inside you, if you felt the ache of forbidden tenderness, the echo of guilt, or the beauty of a love that couldn't last, don't leave without joining this journey. Like the video, share it with someone who still believes love can hurt and heal at the same time, and subscribe for more real, raw stories that speak straight to the heart. Every week, another soul will whisper its truth, another story of love that defied right and wrong. Because love may fade, but its echo never does. Until next time, keep listening and keep feeling.